Welcome back to our panel discussion, Intelligent Automation in Government, from chatbots to robots to AI, sponsored by KPMG here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. My guests today are Jeff Alstott. He's Program Manager at the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity. Robin Tottengall is Chief Data Scientist at the EPA. Linda Williams is Deputy Director for Strategic Technology and Investment at the Defense Logistics Agency. And Kirk Everson is Managing Director of Federal Advisory Practice at KPMG. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And Linda, we're going to start again with you in this segment. Let's talk about some of the issues of actually getting this technology, which are acquisition and buying models, and there's also the issue of making sure that they have the cybersecurity that is requisite for government systems, and also how they become systems of record or attain authority to operate. But you have an interesting model for testing them out. Let's start there.
Well, depending on the technology we're talking about, it kind of runs the gamut of what our acquisition strategy is. For the robotic process automation, those products are really already established in industry, so we can go out and buy those as a COTS product. That's not terribly difficult. They even offer trial licenses, and that's how we've gotten started, and that's how I would recommend any agency start to take a look at it, is to try those trial licenses, see what they can do, and then move on. And that's the point that we're at now. We've had several successful proofs of concept, and we're going to put out a buy for a small portion, a small number of these RPA licenses, and then initially, essentially our next step is that pilot, where we're going to automate a dozen, 2 dozen different processes, and then grow from there as we learn the technology. Because although the technology is established in the commercial sector, it's new for the Department of Defense. There's very few organizations that are really leveraging this anywhere near the capabilities that it can provide. For the other technologies, especially for artificial intelligence, we're still working on that through our R&D efforts. We have an R&D shop in DLA that takes a look at artificial intelligence and what types of tools and what types of information systems we need to provide that tool to the data scientists and to our workforce writ large. So as I said, it just kind of depends on what gamut. The chatbots kind of fall in the middle. Mm-hmm. The chatbots are bots, but they're more with a little bit machine learning, a little bit of more capability to provide logical answers.
And for those chatbots, just as a detailed question, are you looking at simply typed input and output, or are you looking at, say, voice and natural language processing?
Initially, it's the chatbot that you would get if you go to Best Buy or something like that. You're typing in a question and they're coming back with responses. Now, from a security aspect, each of those, we have adopted a cloud-first mentality, so we try not to host our own systems or our own tools. So what we're looking for is taking those technologies, hosting them in the cloud, and of course, they will then inherit the controls that are established within that cloud environment. So that helps get us to that ATO a lot quicker. One of the benefits of I come from the IT organization. Our CIO is already aware of these technologies. She supports innovation, so she's already very in touch with what we're doing and what the considerations are for her to issue an ATO to allow us to operate in production environments.
And just out of curiosity, all of the armed services have their own logistics functions. Is there any area of commonality that you might be able to share with them?
I think the tools are very well positioned to share across the services. We all have our different data environments, our different data lakes, so there's some differences there, but as we've seen some of the reforms with cloud and the cloud initiatives, they're looking at trying to aggregate a lot of that data, and I think there will be a huge benefit there that we can use the same tools, look at the same data, and get the same answer.
Right. Yeah. So I guess then the challenge for that becomes some of the data is in very old systems that are tied to specific instruction sets. Mm-hmm. You have to extract it out of there so the data is usable by these new systems.
Right, and I think that's another area that the bots can be leveraged. If you wanted to share data between systems, what you used to do is you'd build point-to-point or system-to-systems interfaces, and that's costly and it takes time and you have to have permission from everybody to do so. With RPA, you can actually program a bot to go into a system, pull that data out, and bring it over to another system so that you've got it all in one place.
Yeah, talk about automation of a routine task that is important, but nobody wants to do by hand. Okay. Robin, comments on that, getting to the OTA and all the intermediary steps that you need to have?
So I was thinking about this from an inverse viewpoint, right? Because what, at least, I mean, as I was saying, that I can think of more and more of AI being the most prominent use case that I'm seeing at EPA. So what we are doing there is, and as you, Linda, you are saying that we are also going with the idea of cloud first, because we don't want to build some of these capabilities on-premise, because on-premise infrastructure is not built for it, because we need a cloud-based infrastructure, because it needs to be scalable, it needs to be elastic, and also we are seeing that some of these problems that we want to solve actually requires data set from other agencies too. So I think being in the cloud will help us to get access to these systems or these data sets much more easily. So that
from state and local governments.
State and local government, NASA, NOAA, you name it. So any agency, I mean, even we have worked with the DHS to get some of our data sets so that we can look at some of these regulatory or enforcement actions. So we are seeing, by being in the cloud, that help us sharing of data with respect to other agencies or getting data from other agencies. So cloud first is one of the strategies. Then another one is being at the cloud, and this is not a cloud meeting, but on the cloud will help us to use the FedRAMP as one of the ways in which we can get to the ATO faster, because what we are doing is we are looking up to the industry to say that we want to use this technology, and if you have the FedRAMP already approved at a level, then it is easy for us to bring into the organization. So we are working with good partners or partners that we are interested in, say, hey, go and make sure that you have these platforms FedRAMP so that we don't have to go through the whole ATO process to get the system into production. And also we are working with CSPs like Amazon, Microsoft, or IBM, you name it, Google, to find out where they are in scope when it comes to building some of these platforms into FedRAMP. So that will help us make sure that we can get to the production faster. Then my strategy has been, I have told my team that we can establish a ATT so that we don't have to wait for the systems to become FedRAMPed for us to do the experiments. So that is where we are doing all these experiments at the moment. And now the next thing is that will feed into the whole acquisition strategy, because if we are going to cloud, we have to think about a different acquisition strategy, as opposed to, as Linda was saying, if it's a COTS product, I was thinking if it's an IT-70 in the GSS schedule, we can go and directly buy from them, right? So that is a strategy that we are looking at. Where is actually, what kind of tools and techniques that the agency actually requires, and we are trying to be smart to put it in the cloud so that we can understand if from there what is the acquisition strategy that we need to have. Is it going to go through the GSA IT-70, or is it going to be our own acquisition vehicle so that we can have that flexibility? So that's basically how we are tying up, operationalizing these capabilities within the agency all the way to acquiring it.
All right, so interesting pair of strategies that we've heard, and I guess one of the big overlooked facts is how many application vendors are using FedRAMP to get themselves into the cloud, not just the cloud hardware provisioners, so the FedRAMP is pretty widely applied that way. Jeff, you've got big security concerns in IARPA, I'm guessing.
Couple. So, as had been mentioned, all of the current automation techniques that we're talking about sit on top of cyber, and so cybersecurity hasn't gone away, right? We are fortunately in a much better position than we were in the 70s and 80s, where high schoolers could combat big companies or governments using very simple techniques, right? Just
Whistling
because
into the telephone properly.
Exactly. So we're now in a better situation than that. Cybersecurity is not solved by any means, but we have a lot of, in society and in our organizations, sort of cultural knowledge and processes on how to address cybersecurity. So this is good. With automation techniques, be that AI or other more simpler things, there's going to be additional security concerns about adversaries getting into your automation process and incentivizing it or nudging it to start running amok. However, even outside of adversaries deliberately causing problems, there's just the automation system being a problem in and of itself, right? You mentioned at the very beginning about how we had the first transistors were instances of automation, but I say it goes much further back than that, when we had windmills or whatnot. So you have a big stone thing grinding away at corn or wheat, right? That is a great automation process that saves a lot of labor. But it's also a big dangerous thing whirling about, right? And so if you didn't have literal guardrails around it, there's the opportunities for havoc. And so when we think about our automation systems, we need to be very thoughtful about what they are allowed to do and not allowed to do, and finding ways to prove or restrict them to those limits. But also we need to think about, what's this going to do if this breaks? How will it break? Because there will be instances of them breaking, and we want our organizations to be robust to it, right? So in some ways that will be safety concerns, but there's also going to be things about our operational concerns. So if we automate this thing away and then no one in the building knows how to do it anymore and it breaks, what happens? So these are things that we need to be considering as we're standing up these automation
that's the whole area
systems.
of knowledge management, I guess, in some sense. And Kirk, why don't we wind up with you? Give us some advice for, again, looking across government as you have pretty deeply. What's the best way to slide into this very important new area of automation and modernization?
Sure. I think from an acquisition perspective, and we said this in the beginning of our discussion, think about your outcomes, right? Don't try to, say we need to do this with this tool and this with this tool and this with this tool. Focus on what you're trying to do. Focus on an objective that you as an agency are trying to accomplish, and don't get so caught up in the technology. Allow the private sector or the vendor community to say, well, based upon what you're asking for, I think these solutions would be the right fit for you. Obviously, you have to take into consideration some of the security concerns around cloud computing and on-prem instantiation, but I would say from an acquisition perspective, think about the objective measures that you're trying to meet, and think about the timelines that you're trying to meet them in, and then allow for some discussions as far as what that solution looks like. So, but I think it also depends on the type of capability that you want to instantiate. So with Class 1, with RPA, most of the time that's going to be an on-prem instantiation. So as Linda mentioned, you're going to be doing essentially a license buy through the vendor, and then acquiring services typically through another contract through kind of a system integrator type mentality. So kind of two separate acquisition processes there. However, as you move up the stack, into Class 3 artificial intelligence, that's more of a cloud-based solution, because in order for these algorithms to work, in order for these data sets to be affected, you really have to have that compute in the cloud. And so then you're not dealing with licenses anymore, you're dealing with APIs or application programming interfaces. And so that's not necessarily, 2 or 3 or 500 licenses, that's what we call by the drink. So every time you call that API, there's a fraction of a cent or a couple cents that you're going to have to. So it's a different way to buy.
Reporting back on it too.
Right. Yeah. You want to make sure that you have the measures in place to accurately report the usage. But so again, I say all that because, again, what's your objective? What are you trying to accomplish with these tools and technologies? If it's automation of a routine and mundane process, well, you don't need AI. You don't need a cloud for that. If you don't really have that in your agency, you can start small and start to automate some of those on-prem processes through integration at that presentation layer, as Linda mentioned. But if you have really hard data sets similar to what you're doing in the intelligence community and EPA, you might need a cloud acquisition strategy as well.
All right, great advice. And I want to thank all of today's guests for a really fabulous and detailed discussion. They are Jeff Alstott. He's Program Manager at the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity. Robin Tottengall is Chief Data Scientist at the EPA. Linda Williams is Deputy Director for Strategic Technology and Investment at the Defense Logistics Agency. And Kirk Everson is Managing Director of Federal Advisory Practice at KPMG. This panel discussion is Intelligent Automation in Government, from chatbots to robots to AI, sponsored by KPMG here on federalnewsradio.com and Federal News Radio 1500 AM. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsradio.com. Use the search term KPMG.
On behalf of KPMG, thank you for joining us. The archive session will be available shortly. If you requested a training certificate, you will also receive an email with download instructions after the webinar. This concludes our discussion. Thank you.